Module 2 is the peer review process. And I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but I have a feeling some of these other modules are going to go faster than I had budgeted. So I'm not worried as long as you're engaged and you're getting something out of this. I want this to be good for you guys. So if you feel like I'm going on too long about a topic, you know, give me a sign, like hurry it up. If you feel like it needs more time, raise your hand, ask me questions. This is for you. And I wish somebody had done this for me when I was in my PhD program at Berkeley, because there were so many students at that school that it was like sink or swim, and nobody held your hand, nobody gave you advice or tips or strategies, none of it. So you don't have to be lost. There are people to help, and I want this to be helpful for you. So this diagram, I hope it's not hard to see in the back. This is a schematic of a typical submission. So you begin with the upload, but you should screen it before. The authors themselves should screen it before it's ever submitted. And I'm going to give you tips about that in a moment. But the schematic shows you what happens once you begin the upload. So I'm on the website. I know the journal I want to submit to. I've uploaded it. The authors or the editors can right away say, it's not a topic that fits into our journal. Don't be offended, because you don't know what other work they're receiving. They might have 5 other papers that deal with similar topics. I try really hard not to get offended in this process. It's a sensitive process. There's too many things in life that are easy to get offended by. This needs not to be one of them. And if it does go out for peer review, that's a huge success. That bottleneck right there, you've already made it through something. For those of you that are MDs, it's like the difference between sending in your AMCAS application and actually getting the interview for medical school. You're now down to that like final 10 or 20% of people, and you're in. Like, you have a good shot of getting in. And then the peer review process is blinded. I've never seen a paper where I know who the authors are. I'm not allowed to know. Now, sometimes I can kind of guess because of the methods, especially if they do a good job at their methods, because then they're telling me where they got their cohort from, which hospital, which institution, and then I might be able to care. But personally, I don't care. When I'm reading the paper, I'm kind of coming at it in an agnostic fashion. Like, are the data good? Do they tell the story well? Do they find something exciting? Do the tables and figures get me excited? Do they support the paper? So in the revision process, there's kind of 3 choices I'm given. One of them is to accept and then ask you to do some minor changes. And that's probably most often what I see. The other choice I have to say is you need to change it and you need to give me some major, major changes. And that's kind of a subjective call. I've seen people call something major when it's my work, and I looked at it and I'm thinking, this doesn't feel major. This just feels like a few small things. And they're calling it major. Who cares? Just be blessed that it's not a lot of things and go with it. Again, don't be offended. Then there's also a major revision that can result in a reject. And then obviously there's also the rejection at this level too. I could just be told the reviewers didn't like your paper and that's it, you're done here. I've worked with colleagues that get very upset about that, and they want to write to the editor and fight and say, hey, can you please just look at this? We think this is great. Your reviewer stinks. They have bad ideas. Don't ever do that. Just please don't. Once it's rejected, let it go. You just have to let it go. And you have to move on to the next journal, because you really don't know why. And you're right, somebody might have given it a bad review. What I have done, and what I've had colleagues do, which I also think is very reasonable, is we did get back a review once where it was very clear to me that the person reviewing it had not read the paper carefully at all. There were a lot of misstatements and points that we had made very clear in the methods that they said we failed to make. And in that case, I did write to the editor, and I did point this out, and they were very grateful to me for doing that. But only in the most extreme example would I do that, where it was just so clear to me that they hadn't read it. And otherwise, I wouldn't normally do that. But again, I would err on the side of not writing to the editor, because what you don't want to do is get the reputation of being a combative author, and being combative in the way you respond to things. And that's another problem I see. People will get the reviews and they'll respond back to the reviewers, and you do a point counterpoint, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and they're very angry in their point counterpoint, where it's very obvious they've gotten very upset by the critique, and then they're getting mad at the reviewer. That's a bad idea. You just don't want to yell at your reviewer. It's just bad form. So as you can see down the schematic, the decision-making steps, once the paper's accepted, there's also more steps downstream of that that will take time before the paper's actually in print. One of the things that takes the most time is getting the copies back. So I'll get a copy back that's marked up by the editor. And the editor is usually somebody who's trained in medical terminology, who understands the JAMA guidelines of appropriate medical terminology and abbreviations. And they're giving it a very administrative review. By that point, the science is intact. Everyone's happy with the science. They're just trying to make your paper read better and present well in their journal and do their due diligence. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question that if the editor decides to reject your paper, but it says that if you manage change and have improvements, you have also can resubmit the paper again. So it is the view.
If it's a major revision, absolutely. And that's what they're inviting you to do. And you don't have to accept the invitation. I've known of this, I've never done this, but I've known of people getting back major revisions where they felt like, oh, what a headache, I don't want to do all this work. Or one of the suggestions or requirements was something they didn't have the time to do it. And so they pulled the paper and said, no thanks, because it's an invitation. And so they rejected the invitation and said, we're going to submit elsewhere, thank you, have a nice day. And then they moved on to another journal. I've personally never done that because the major revisions have never been so awful that we couldn't fix the problems. But you might get one that is unfixable, or they want you to run a whole new experiment that would take you a year, and that's not reasonable. And you're thinking, oh, I can't do that, no way. And maybe you just want to wrap the paper up and be done. You're leaving a job, you're moving on from your postdoc to your first staff scientist position, and you absolutely don't have the time. If that's the case, it's okay to submit somewhere else. It's an invitation. That's all it is. If you get accepted, that's fantastic, but you can say no yourself. And then finally, the author's final revisions will come, yours, the PDF will get produced, you get to proofread it one last time, and then it becomes published available online. That's kind of something new. When I was starting out, we didn't have all these online journals and EPUB ahead of print. That didn't exist. And so it's kind of nice. It also changes the citations on your CV, so be mindful of that. I have to update my CV constantly because once something goes from being EPUB ahead of print to the real citation, I want the full citation there, the volume, the page numbers, blah, blah, blah. I want that all on my CV. And so you have to update that and keep it current. The EPUB ahead of print, I think some people are fine with that, but I like mine to have the full page number detail. Okay. So how do we select the journal we're going to send it to? Because this really is one of the most critical decision nodes that you have. Where is this paper going to go? I rely on advice of my colleagues. I often will give them the primary aim, the top line finding, and my tables and figures. They know the methods because they know the cohort. So I have them read just a few things and I'll say to them, I'm making a decision, here are my thoughts, and they help me arrive at a decision for a journal. Sometimes I just know. Sometimes I just know in my gut, oh my gosh, we're sending it there. Like the JAMA Onc paper I keep bringing up because I'm so excited about it. That paper is going to JAMA Onc. But you may not be as clear. You may not know, and you may be worried that you're aiming too high or you aiming too low. One of the things I like to think about, and again, I thought you guys were going to be mostly in the mental health field, so I pointed out those examples, but I'm in the field of urology. Prostate cancer is a urological malignancy. And so the journals that are open to me that are specific to that discipline also include bladder and kidney and testis cancer. And so there's other cancer and pediatric urology. So I have to be mindful of that. I have to think about who are the readership of this journal. Do I want this paper to go beyond just my discipline? Like, do I think it has broader interest to maybe all of oncology? And maybe my journal is the JCO, the Journal of Clinical Oncology, or do I think it actually has maybe policy implications, like my current paper where JAMA could be a good home, because it's not just about oncology, but it has implications about screening recommendations and broader topics that are being discussed nationally in the field of medicine. So it really does depend on your study and what you found. You could have a great question, it could have all those things, all of the policy implications, but you have a null finding, and that's your real finding, and that's okay, but it's not as interesting as you'd hoped it would be. So if it's a null finding and you can't claim anything interesting, maybe you have to dial it back a notch from JAMA because it just isn't going to find a home there. there's no science to this. It's an art, picking and choosing. Sometimes I have sent things in to a higher bar journal than I think I might deserve just to get the reviews, which is kind of selfish. I don't often admit that. But it's sometimes a good strategy for really vetting the work. One time we just got stupid lucky and it got accepted in that higher bar journal. So I don't want to say that's going to happen to you often. But it did invite back comments, and those comments were so valuable to me to think about some of the issues with the work. Yes?
But is there a way to contact someone that isn't directly a lead editor or reviewer for an opinion? Like, you know, you talk to a program officer before you put your grant in, certain
Right.
things. Is there like not a preview, but just to say,
It's a great question.
is this something that, I mean, somebody recommended looking at the last like 2 volumes.
Right,
to
right.
see what have they recently published, is there anything related, is there anything similar?
Sure.
Just to get an idea.
It's a fantastic question. So I sometimes will go to the associate editor or assistant editor-in-chief of a journal. Sometimes they'll even have somebody listed. If you go to the journal's website and the advice for authors is there, they might even have a point of contact. I know my own bosses have done this because we had something that was a very cutting edge finding and we were very scared to send it out for peer review because one of the saddest things in our field, folks, is that you get scooped. People will see good ideas, they'll reject your paper, and then they'll go and rerun the science. I can't even believe that happens, but I'm old enough now that I know it does. Be careful because you don't want to send it out and allow the masses to read it if it's super special. And so for one particular paper, my boss was like, we are not sending this out. This is too special. I'm going to contact friends at journals and say to them, are you going to help me get this through or not? And not everyone has those friends. So if you don't have them, go to the senior-most person on your paper and ask them, are we in a situation where I should be careful about distributing this? And I think by the point you've written the paper and you have the data, you kind of know that. Is this something so sensitive that I don't want others to be seeing this? I've even had a situation, I couldn't believe it was a friend that did this to me, where I went to a conference and I presented, and my bad, I took too long. I took 6 months to get my paper written and submitted because I was busy after the conference. And this person went and submitted the comparable study and published it in his own journal. And I was really upset, and even used the same language, things that are very epi-oriented language that this person wouldn't use, that I use all the time. And so it felt very disingenuous to me. So again, I hate that we have to worry about these things, but I would say be mindful of this. If you go and present at a national conference, be ready to send your paper out like the next day. You're not allowed to present at a national conference if your work is under consideration already. So actually be careful not to submit your work before. I didn't put this in the deck, but it's something I'm thinking of right now because I'm about to present on some work. The day I get back from that conference in Chicago, my paper's ready to go. Click submit. It's really important to be ready. Don't wait 6 months like I did. It really made me crazy, yes.
Can preprint servers may be a solution for that?
I'm sorry?
Preprint server journals like BioArchive.
You know, the only problem is that if you're talking about the situation of a conference, typically they don't even want your work being looked at by a journal when you go to stand at the meeting. So once you're done at the meeting, whether you're on podium or you're at a poster, once that's done, you can do whatever you want. But and you know what, it depends on the conference. I should say that too. The cancer conferences I go to, their rules are very strict. In fact, they're only getting stricter. They don't want you having work being reviewed. So once you're done with the conference, then send your paper in. But know the rules of the conference, because my conferences might be stricter than the ones you go to. I don't know. And they may be okay with you submitting the paper as long as it's not accepted yet or in print. It depends. Just know the rules. That would be my advice. I know my rules, and my rules are don't do it, no way, no how. You're not allowed to send it out for review before the conference, which is kind of a nuisance because it means that should I run back to my hotel room after my podium is done and click submit? Like, I don't know. Is it that crazy? I don't think it's that crazy, but it sure did sting to have somebody do that. Any other questions? I know, right? Ugh, awful. Can't imagine. So I mentioned the target audience, know who they are, know who you want reading your work, who's the appropriate audience. One of the comments I love making when I give reviews is, this paper is a perfect fit for the audience of this journal. And I put thought into that comment. And if I think that's true, I say it. If I don't think it's true, I don't say it. And that's something people are thinking about when they review your work. Okay, so impact factor. There's actually a paper at the back of the room. You don't need to grab it now, Mira. It's something for you to take home. Oh, did you already? Okay. Right, so there is a paper I decided to pass out to all of you because I want you to be aware of the criticisms of the impact factor. This is a very accepted metric of the rigor of the journal that you're getting published in. And we all talk about it as though it's the Bible of peer review in the sciences. And there's some problems with it, especially now, because right now we're in a world where everything's becoming online. There's more open access journals, there's more online submissions. What impacts the weight of a journal typically used to be measured as this factor, the IF, and you can look it up, you can Google it for a journal, but it's sort of it's a composite metric, and I didn't put the full equation up because I decided that was way too geeky, but you can look it up, and I put a URL at the bottom of the slide deck that you can click on to go to see how it is computed and its full definition. But it is a metric of how often work in that journal gets cited. So if I get published in the New England Journal, my work is probably going to end up in the media. It's probably going to get noticed somewhere in a newspaper. It might end up on a news, TV News 5 clip, which has happened for some of my colleagues. So you get a lot of repeated citations. So that impact factor grows and grows and grows. So some journals, they've just learned the rhythm of it, and they have very high impact factors. Other journals, I'm amazed and impressed at how they've gotten their impact factors up over time. The board I'm on, the impact factor, when I joined, it was like 3, and now it's 10, which is really respectable. And it's kind of an arbitrary number. It can range, obviously, as low to 0 and as high to as 100. Just to give you an example, the journals that have the highest would be Nature, Science, Cell. Those would be the journals where you're in the 30s or 40s for impact factor. That's kind of the highest we see. And, oh, you have a question? Oh, you made a face. I don't remember what their current one is, but I want to say it's in the 30s. JAMA and New England are up there, like low 30s, and maybe Science, Cell, Nature, like pushing 40s. It changes. It's a dynamic number. I never hang my hat on an exact number. Another journal that was shocking to me, because it was the first author pub I had after I finished the work with the pharmaceutical company where we validated this great tool, European Urology. I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's fine, we'll go there. I wasn't excited. And then I found out the journal impact factor was in the 20s. I'm like, oh, okay, let's go there. And so I would say look it up because it changes. That's another journal where over the years they've become very popular. There's a lot of money in that journal, and that may be impacting why. Because it's a urologist, it's a discipline where they have a lot of meetings, and they throw a lot of events. They have big membership. So what's good? It really is hard to pinpoint an exact number. I don't like saying something's good or bad. I would say more appropriately, start at the top of this thought process. Where does your paper belong? Don't just, I have a colleague who, someone younger than me, who's always asking, but what's the impact factor? What's the impact factor? And I'm thinking, can we decide first that it's the right home for this paper before we worry about that? Because maybe it's not the right home. And that's kind of how I look at the journal. It's your home. It's the home, the place your paper's going to live forever. So pick it wisely. Anything with a 1 means that it's been cited about 1 time in 1 to 2 years, just to kind of give you an idea of how that metric works. So that's why 1 isn't that great. Okay. I came up with these quotes from the British Medical Journal just because I thought they were kind of important about why some people criticize the impact factor. And Seglin is a very well-known critic of the impact factor, and I think he's quoted, or maybe he's the first author of the paper I handed out, that it conceals the difference in article citation rates. And he gives an example. In articles in the most cited, half of the articles in a journal are cited 10 times as often as the least cited half. So it's kind of this arbitrary way of looking at citation amount, that it's not a real rate. And then he also mentions that it's determined by technicalities that are unrelated to the quality of the actual article. It could be more about the journal than the article. And it depends on the research field. I think we all know that. I'm never going to be, if I go after urology journals, except for European urology, let's take that one out of the equation because it's the outlier. Most of the other journals in my field don't get above 10. So if I only published in my field and in my journals, I would be limited just because of that. That's why it's important for me to go after JAMA Oncology and other important, like JCO, because I don't want to just end up in my own peer-reviewed literature, or I'll always be limiting myself. Okay. And that article is for you all to read later, just to remind you that it's imperfect. Yes?
So one of the, or I was just thinking about this, I've also heard whenever you reference articles, I've noticed that certain journals will tend to cite their own literature as a result. So like people that publish in Nature, their references will typically incorporate a lot of Nature papers versus like people who want to say like, you know, go to Cell, they tend to cite a lot of Cell papers in your citations as references. I don't know if that's a cause or an effect of the journal impact factor, but that's kind of what the train of thought has been in terms of like what's normal.
So that's a great observation. I don't know what drives that either. I have never been asked ever by a journal.
I just wasn't sure if it was
Right.
me noticing this or if, like, because I.
Well, now I'm going to look.
But that was kind of one of the tricks that I was taught to kind of make it easier to you know, send it to Nature, Cell, Science.
If that is a strategy, I hope it's a dying one. I think in the age of open access journals, you'll see less of that. But I honestly have never been dinged for not having citations from the journal I'm submitting to, and I've never been asked to provide more that are from that journal. I'm not published in Cell, so it could be happening and it would be off my radar if at that very, very high, most competitive level that's going on. I think often, though, the work has to be so important for you to be even in the situation of submitting there that I'd be surprised if that goes on, but I guess nothing surprises me anymore. I don't know.
It's one of those things, like, of course they will never put that in writing.
Well, no.
But it's just, it seems.
You feel like it's a under the surface practice that's going on.
Yeah. Kind of like how a lot
Somebody needs to create a graph. There's a study right there. I like that. Is that a pattern? Because that's very self-fulfilling, and that's not right. That alters the metric.
also use that as an argument against impact factor.
Right, right. And yet, you know, look, we all need a way of saying our work is published somewhere that matters. And I think the best strategy I use and I tell my team to use is present your work. Be out there on the national stage. Get onto podium. Don't just present paper posters, although never turn down an opportunity to present a paper poster. No one's above that. Always, and actually it was the pharmaceutical people that really taught me that, I have to admit, that over the years, I started to move away from paper posters, like it was kind of beneath me, and I would send other people in my absence, and then I would go to the poster and I would listen to them and I'd think, you know, they're not ready for this. This is a lot of pressure, and they're not quite stating the science correctly. So then I'd hang out with them and I'd make sure if they got a tough question, I stepped in when it was appropriate. I'm not going to talk over them. I'm not going to get in the way of them trying to learn how to speak at a poster. But if they're struggling, then I have a moment. So I started spending more and more time at posters with staff, and then the pharmaceutical company sent me to Madrid first class to present a poster. And I'm thinking, okay, that is a huge waste of money, but I'm not saying no. I'll go gladly. I'd never been to Madrid. It was beautiful. But once I got there, I realized there were a lot of senior people at posters. I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, and then they literally said to me, don't ever turn down a chance to present your work, even if it's just at the paper. And I agree with that now. I really do try to live that. If you have the money to travel, if you're supported on a grant, or if somebody's supporting you to go, I always volunteered in my junior years, like fresh out of my PhD program. My boss had a young son. She didn't want to travel too much. The minute we had an opportunity for work to get accepted, I would be the first one raising my hand saying, send me, send me. So do that, volunteer, because if you get sent, then you're learning and you're getting over your fear of speaking. There was a time early on where it used to terrify me if I did get on podium, because there'd be 1,000 to 3,000 people in some of these audiences, and I thought I was going to have a small heart attack before I got on stage. Now I love it because I feel like you learn what you're talking about, and you learn that you have something to share. And not everyone's going to like your style or like your topic or think you're a good speaker, but if you're excited and you feel like you have some knowledge to share, it's a really great thing in life to get on podium and to be a presenter in front of an audience and get over that fear. because we all have it. I mean, there's nobody I know that doesn't still get a little bit of the butterflies in their stomach before they have to speak. I like it. My son thinks I'm crazy. So another important thing to have on your mind is how long is this going to take? Because some journals are notorious for taking forever. In fact, the journal that my boss picked, where he felt like the editor needed to say, we're going to find, this paper will find a way in, it's a cutting edge finding, you don't want to get scooped. The reason he went to that editor is because before that journal, he went somewhere else where they labored over it for months and in the end rejected it. It went through several cycles of revisions, and in the last revision they just said, sorry, no. So he wasted months, and it made him so angry, understandably. And then finally he was thinking, oh my gosh, time is now very sensitive. This work has now been presented at a meeting, it was reviewed, he sent it in right after the meeting, he did everything right, but the journal took so long and then his work got rejected, so all those months were lost. And so I would just say, look, you're allowed to ask these questions, and some journals will even have it on their websites. What's the average turnaround? What's the expectation? I'll tell you that the journal where I'm a board member that I review, there's a rule. As a reviewer, I'm not allowed to take more than 2 weeks. And I'll tell you, I always take a week and 6.5 days. I'm terrible. But 2 weeks is the max. So I know I have to get it done. I don't take beyond that. I'm not allowed to. So if you find a journal that's very clear about its turnaround, that's a selling point for that journal for you if you have time-sensitive work, or if you just have work that you're excited to get out and you don't want to wait 6 months for an answer. I think that's fair. It's a reasonable thing for you, the author, to shop around for journals that have reputations for being timely in their reviews. Open access used to get a very bad rap. I think this is now very much a part of our reality, and it's actually a unique opportunity. One of the papers I had, that the data were not as exciting as we had hoped, and the study question was good, but in the end, the finding wasn't nearly as sexy as we'd hoped. We went to an open access journal. Now, it cost money. We had to pay $2,500, which is not a small amount of money. I paid it out of my grant. I want to get that work published. One of my residents, who's first author on it, had already suffered through 3 rejections on this paper. And we were thinking to ourselves, let's just call time of death on this and get it in somewhere, because it just needs to be published and I can't take it anymore revising this thing. And so we ended up going open access. The reputation, though, that open access means you have to pay, that's also kind of going away. So keep your eye on open access journals. Look at where the reputation is. In fact, JCO, which is one of the most prestigious journals in my field, now has a precision oncology journal that has an open access option. So some of the biggest journals are now offering this. And it's a very dynamic time. It's a very, very much an evolving time. So don't be snobby about that. The very first impressions about open access were that they were like the lesser journals and don't go there, it's desperate move. I don't think that way anymore. Keep your eye on those. And then finally, I have put in here some important guidelines that you can consult. I would strongly recommend, if you do get a copy of this deck, to review them. It's very helpful to understand some of the common rules across all journals, and some of the societies that are the guideposts for this, that make the rules, that are the reasons we do the things we do when we submit journals or papers to journals. Preparing the submission, this is, to me, the cardinal sin that everyone makes. They don't go straight to the author guidelines. Every journal has these available to you. Before you do anything, pull them up on a PDF, print them out, do whatever you need, read them carefully. Don't fail to adhere to every single one of them, as much as they pertain to the work you're handing in. Please do that. It's just so easy. It makes everything easier. And I gave the example where we broke a small rule in one of our papers and we failed to mention IRB approval, even though we had it, and it was a rejection because I broke a rule. And so they had every right to do it, and it's just so heartbreaking to lose a chance to get published over something so avoidable. Letter to the editor is not always required anymore, but I strongly recommend it. It's a chance for you to speak directly with the most senior person at the journal and communicate succinctly the title of the paper, a sentence or two about why he or she should get excited, and a thank you for taking the time to consider it. It's a social grace that I strongly believe in. I don't want this one to die. I think that you also provide an opportunity if the paper does get a major revision, you now have a conversation that got started. And so after the revision comes back to you, you get a chance to say again to the editor, thank you so much for an opportunity to revise my work. Here's what we did, and this is the revised copy. And so now there's a dialogue going on between you and the editor, or associate editor, whoever the journal recommends that you correspond with. Everything's online now, and so this is usually a field that you upload on. So it'll say, letter to editor, all the pieces of your paper, your manuscript, your tables, figures, and you're just adding or uploading these documents into each field. You're not mailing this, obviously, I'm dating myself, and you're not sending it in an email. It's accompanying the whole submission. Sometimes we're asked to recommend reviewers for our own work. I have found this to be very tricky because basically you're recommending the people that you're competing with in a way. And I gave the example of reaching out to people whose findings were different than yours. I would never recommend somebody whose findings were different unless I had done that already, because I want to make sure that they're aware that we have a paper coming out or being considered where our data are different. And that's another great reason to loop them in, because if you've looped them in, you can disclose that. As long as they're not a co-author, they can be a reviewer. And now they've offered you their criticisms and feedback, and you've addressed them, hopefully. Always address them. Do what they say, as long as it's reasonable. And then the reviewer is going to see the paper come, they'll know the conversation you had, and they'll see that you adhered to their recommendations. So it's a very win-win kind of a situation. If you don't have an obvious person to communicate with in the field, if you're not sure the other author is going to be very nice about this, if you don't know them at all, or they have a reputation of being kind of a sharp elbow personality, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to just go it alone, ask your supervisors for recommendations, or look carefully at your own peer review literature in your field and think about reasonable people. I noticed that this isn't always asked for. It used to be very common to have to recommend your own reviewers. I feel like this is kind of going away, but not entirely. So just be aware of it, be mindful of it as part of the peer review submission process. Always know the reputation of the reviewer if you're suggesting one. Don't ever suggest somebody if you don't really know them, or somebody's offhandedly saying, oh yeah, that person would be great. Don't go with that advice. I've learned the hard way. It might seem like a good idea, but know that person yourself, or know their work and at least a little bit about how they're seen in the field, if they're going to be a favorable person. Otherwise, you might actually be recommending the most critical human being on planet Earth, and now you've just completely sabotaged your own chances of getting accepted. And then this is probably one of the most important nuggets of advice. I do this to my husband. He hates it, but I do it anyway. Give your paper to somebody for a final read-through before you click submit. Just let somebody else look at it one time and offer an opinion. And the best person to do that might actually be someone outside your field, because they're going to have questions that no one else had, that already knows the work. And one of the things I think we all do, we're all guilty of it, is you're so comfortable as co-authors on a paper with the way things were done that you don't poke holes into your own story. You don't poke any holes into your own story. You think you've addressed it all. You think you've taken care of every potential criticism. Oh, I wrote my limitations. I put that limitation in the conclusions or the discussion. You think you've taken care of it all. Somebody else comes to that paper and is going to think of something about your methods that you might not have explained well. Well, in the example of me remeasuring my variable 3 different ways, what if I had forgotten to do that and somebody had said to me, why did you treat it categorically? Why did you do that? It would have occurred to me, oh my gosh, that's a great question. I didn't poke a hole at that, because I know it was unbiased, but somebody else is asking that question, which means they're not convinced it was unbiased, or they just are curious, and I haven't found anywhere in my paper where I've explained it well enough, because now they have this residual question. So I didn't do my due diligence at eradicating that thought or addressing it and preempting them from asking me. So be sure to have somebody else read it. Also, typos. I mean, I've gotten papers that I've reviewed that are riddled with typos, and the science was beautiful, and the methods were beautiful, and the tables and figures were beautiful, and I can't get past the fact that somebody was so lazy that they didn't proofread their work and get rid of typos. I would never get upset about 1 or 2 minor, but these were like systematic typos throughout the paper, which means you're rushing, and you're not using Word, because it squiggly lines everything. Like, come on, how much easier can it get? But another pet peeve of mine, and I had to say this today because I never get a chance to say this. The word data is a plural word. It's not data is, it's not this data, it's these data and data are. Total pet peeve as an epidemiologist. I even hear this on the news. I'll hear people who are supposed to be well-grounded in stats saying the data is, and I can't, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard for me. Like, get it right. And don't put that in your paper. Get it right. It's a really easy thing. I had to take Latin. My dad made me. So maybe that's why I can't stand this. But it just is very important to be grammatically correct. And that's a word we're going to use throughout our lives as career professionals. If you're a scientist, guess what word is probably the most popular word in your vocabulary? Data. So just say it right. Like, that's all I'm asking. Even if I've only changed all of you, I've done my job in this world. All right. Sorry. Okay, and now tracking it. When you track your submission, I've already mentioned the possibilities. You might get lucky and get an accept with no revisions. I've seen this happen. I'm 47, almost 48. I got out of school when I was 30. One time I've seen it. One time. Don't count on it. Chances are it's not going to be you or me ever. You're going to have to revise it. So just accept that. When you get that letter back that says, we're so sorry to inform you. I used to see those words and I'd be like, oh no, it's rejected. Keep reading. That's not the whole sentence. The sentence usually finishes, we're sorry that we can't accept it in this format. Please know that we'd be willing to reconsider under the following conditions. See the reviewer's comments. Thank you. Have a nice day. So read the whole thing. Read the paragraph. It's not that long. I have had physicians like blow up in anger in front of me when they see this because they're thinking they're getting rejected. I'm like, calm down. It's all good. And it's fine. And so if you expect this response, you'll be already ready to receive it. You're going to be revising your paper, folks. It's going to happen. Hopefully it'll be minor. Hopefully if it says it's major, it's actually minor, because everyone likes to throw around that terminology like it's very clear what that means. The most important job you have once you get that revision is you need to draft up a point counterpoint. What do I mean? I will typically copy the entire review, paste it into a new Word document. I will create 2 font colors. One will be the reviewer's comment. Immediately following is my response. Then the next reviewer's comment, then my response. I do that per reviewer. I don't jumble the reviewer's comments. I keep it as reviewer 1, his or her comment, mine, his or hers, mine, blah, 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 all the way down the line. And I number it because they usually aren't nice enough to do that for you, and I like to be able to follow what I'm saying. And sometimes you might get one paragraph, but it's actually 10 questions or 10 things you need to fix. So put it into a nice looking format so that it's easy for them to go back and say, okay, I had that question. Oh yeah, she did address that. Okay, and I had that. Oh yeah, she did address that. The other thing is be nice. I was mentioning the person that gets so angry when they get negative reviews, and I had a situation where somebody was writing a very hostile response. I'm like, no, give this to me. I need to take this over. You want to be nice. You want to say, thank you for pointing this out. And then at the end, your comments made this paper stronger. The only time it's appropriate for you to fight back a little bit is when the reviewer's wrong and you know they're wrong, or you don't want to take their advice and you feel justified in not taking their advice. And that happens, but be very clear. Just be very clear, why aren't you taking my advice? Because I'm going to see that review later and I'm going to see your response. I get to see them all the time, and occasionally I'm really satisfied with what people say back, and other times I'm thinking, wow, that's really rude. I'm not satisfied. And then guess what I'm going to make you do? Another revision. Or if it's really awful, I'm pretty nice. I usually don't do that. I probably should more often than I do. But I'm going to make you do it again. And so just don't put yourself in that situation. Be nice. The person took the time. And you know what? Being a reviewer, guess what I get paid? Thank you. Ding, ding, ding. Volunteer. And it takes me a lot of time. And I take it seriously. So I spend a few hours. Right. And so it's not like I'm getting any glory for it. Nobody except people in this room know I'm on a board. No one I work with cares. So, I get to put it on my CV, but it's not like I'm page 12 buried in some little section. No one cares that I do this. I care because I look at it as a mentorship opportunity. I mentor a lot of students. I've mentioned the residents. I also mentor college students and sometimes even high school students, rarely. And I take that responsibility seriously. If you're going to come work with me, I want you to learn something. And so if I'm spending my own time reading your paper and really honestly, earnestly trying to make it better and telling you what I think is going to make it a stronger paper, and you're rude back, or you simply say, no, I'm not doing that, or you don't address the point at all, I find that offensive. I do. And I think I skew nice. So imagine someone who doesn't skew nice, what they might be thinking. They're going to reject you. So I would say just do everything they say, or provide a nice reason why you don't think you should. And then usually at the end, if I do that, I always give myself an out. I'll say, I feel strongly that the data already addressed this question, but if the reviewer still disagrees, I will reconsider. And then it gives me a chance to get the revision back. Because if I just say no, then the reviewer has the right to reject me. Now I've taken away that right a little bit. So there's kind of like a cat and mouse game that you can play if you think you don't want to get rejected. Yes?
Has a journal ever taken a review back because they were like, whoa, they stepped out of their bounds, this is not what the person who submitted their paper was like saying, proposing,
Ye-
they were like, oh no, this review is completely, like, is there any type of,
The only situation I know of is the one that I was kind of mentioning earlier, because I probably wouldn't ever get to find out about that. The editor probably wouldn't let me know in order to keep that person blinded, and they'd probably just never use that reviewer again. And it would happen behind the scenes. But the one situation where somebody wrote a review that I felt they hadn't read the paper, it was just so clear to me they hadn't read the paper. I mean, there were like 10 things. And they said things weren't in the paper that were not just listed once, but they were like in the abstract and in the results and in the tables and figures. And I'm thinking, you couldn't have read this. So if that happens, and in that situation when it did, I wrote to the editor and complained, and then the paper was rerouted to a new reviewer and ended up getting a major revision, but then ended up getting accepted. And that reviewer, I don't know what became of them. But I would hope they would not be put in a position to review again. And I do know that journals take it very seriously, that if somebody's inappropriate, if they're overly harsh, or if they're called out on not reading the paper carefully, and it's obvious they didn't from their review, they're usually not put back in the cycle again or used again. And it's kind of a missed opportunity. You might not care because you're doing it for free, and you might think, oh, the heck with that journal, I don't care, I was doing it for free. But to me, it's kind of an honor, and it makes me a better writer. I definitely know it has made me a better writer to critique the work of my peers and think, and I love to reread not only my review after the fact, but I like to read the other people's reviews quickly. I mean, I don't have time to do this all the time, but I get one paper a month. I'll look at what other people thought of. What did I not notice that someone else noticed? Because I want to be thinking and making my skills stronger. And so it helps me to say, oh gosh, I didn't even think of that. That's a great point. They didn't say this, or they mentioned this, and I didn't see that as a problem. And wow, that really is a problem. So I think it makes you think, it gets your mind going to really read what other people noticed as well. And I love it when we're in sync. I got that too. Okay, and then when you resend your submission in, typically you would accompany it with a new revised letter to the editor where you're saying, we addressed every comment as best we could, we have a point counterpoint attached, here's the revised manuscript in track changes so that it's very clear where you made the changes from the original submission. That's very important. I don't think I have that as a bullet, but when you, outlining the changes in the letter, but you also want your manuscript to show all the things that you did. And you thank them. You thank them again. I can't emphasize that enough. It goes a long way. Manners are still good in this world. Okay. Sad face rejection. What do you do? The first thing I do, and this fortunately doesn't happen very often anymore, but it happens, is when I get a rejection, I read every comment. And I give myself a day to be depressed, and then I come back to it maybe a day later, after a weekend. And I really do try to address all of these points. Now you might think, why would you bother doing that? Because it's already been rejected, you can't resubmit it. There is a possibility that when you resubmit your paper somewhere new, you might end up with the same reviewer. And they're gonna already know what they had to say to you. They're gonna remember the work. This has happened to me. And they're going to know that you ignored everything that you said to them. And so it's just not a good idea. But let's say the probability is small. You know, what are the odds that that's going to happen? It probably isn't going to happen. Still, they took the time to think about your work, and they took the time to critique it. So pay attention. There may be some things in there that you feel appropriate ignoring, and that may be fine. But there also are things in there that surely you probably should be thinking about that will make your work stronger. So when you resubmit that paper, you've now got kind of a gift with the new journal. So the old journal rejected you. The new journal, you're coming to as a new, better version of yourself. The paper's better, your thoughts are tighter, the comments are good. You get a new, fresh chance because that new journal has no idea that you were rejected somewhere else. They don't know. So don't go in there with an insecure perspective like, oh, I'm rejected. Go in there thinking this is a brand new opportunity to be awesome. And you can be. So I just really wouldn't get too down on yourself, and I wouldn't ignore the advice. The other thought, though, is did you select the wrong journal? If you didn't even get out for peer review, the answer is a slam dunk yes. If they didn't even send it out for people to review, there's no way you picked the right journal. And that might not be your fault. It might be just because of timing. They have another similar paper, or they're just no longer interested in that topic. Just think about that. Were you too ambitious? Did you aim really, really high and you should have come down a notch? The target audience, was that bad? Were there methodologic flaws that you can fix, that are actually within your power to fix and make your paper better, and now you can do it? Then do it. And then the clarity of your writing. We'll get to the salesmanship and strategy in a moment, but the clarity does need to be there. If you haven't told a good story, it may be your data are great, your science is great, the journal was the right pick, the audience is the right audience, everything was in line, you just didn't tell a good story. You weren't a good storyteller. And I've met people that are just amazing at this. There's one professor at Harvard that I work with, and he's he's such a superstar. He's one of these people that was like a full professor at age 45, which is just insane. And MD, PhD, training, really smart guy. He also knows how to write beautifully. And so I like reading his work. I go out of my way, even if it's a paper I wouldn't have normally read. If I know he just published something, I'm reading it because I just kind of want to hear him speak in words on paper to me. And I'm like, oh, that's really great. That's the way you say things. Oh, he's awesome. And everyone loves him. I mean, I'm not the only one that's a fan. He's also so kind with his time. If you know somebody like that, latch on tight. If you know a good professor or mentor, somebody in your work environment that is a natural mentor, seek that person out. Be kind about their time because they might be very busy, but seek them out and seek out their advice as you go through this process, because I guarantee there are some people that just love giving their time and advice to younger people. I love those people. I didn't have many of them in my career, and they're really special. Find one. That would be another nugget of wisdom. And then finally, be persistent. It will get published. You will get your work published. You can't have a quitting attitude. Persistence is, to me, my dad used to have a plaque on his wall. He worked at NCI for about 10 years, and he was a deputy director, I won't say where, but he was here in the 80s. And one of the most beautiful pieces of writing on his wall was about persistence and how it overrides being smart, being clever, having a great personality. Persistence is everything. You will get published. It will happen. But pay attention to what you're hearing in terms of the criticism. If you're too sensitive and you aren't somebody who's going to accept somebody telling you you're not perfect, well, then maybe this isn't the field for you. Seriously. So, okay. All right, and then finally I had to end with a cartoon. I'll let you read it. It's really not this bad. It feels this bad. Especially like the axe. And it's really, I don't know, no, it's not a Far Side. I forget what this is, but I miss Far Side. All right.